a reminder to everybody that the lecture is recorded, and it will be up on the website in case anybody needs to go back and watch the lecture. So we're going to go ahead and finish up the presentation that we started on Monday. Today's Wednesday. All right, so we were talking about workplace issues, and we were about to start with the employer responsibility. So when you get hired, that person that hires you is your employer. And there are certain things that they have to do for you because they're obligations by law, things that they have to take care of, things that they are responsible for. And so we're going to talk about what some of those things are. So one thing that your employer is responsible for is keeping you away from physical or mental harm. So there are about 6,000 people that die work-related deaths every year. A lot of these are electrocutions or accidents, like car accidents. So you do have like truck drivers that have accidents while they're driving their trucks. That's a work-related accident or a work-related death. If you're working as an electrician or you're working in any kind of, really in any profession, but there are certain professions that are a little bit more dangerous than others. There are also 5 million, with an M, work-related injuries or illnesses that are reported every year. And those are more common things. I'll give you an example. So 2 years ago, I fell in my classroom because when I went to go sit in my chair rolled out from under me and I fell. And so when I fell, I tried to stop myself with my hands and I sprained my wrist. That was reported as a work-related injury because it happened to me at work. And so those are things that are more common, and it can range from something as simple as slipping and falling to something like losing a finger or, breaking a bone and things like that. Those would be work-related injuries. And then hundreds of work-related errors or accidents go unreported. And that's actually way more common than you think. Sometimes somebody gets hurt at work and they just don't want to deal with the paperwork, or they think, well, it's okay, I'm going to be fine. And so then they don't report it. And then you run into the issue of, later on I'm hurt, but I didn't say anything and now it's too late and things like that. So if you're working somewhere and you get hurt, you always want to make sure that you report that injury because there are ways that your business, that your employer can take care of you. So employers should provide the following things. They should provide adequate light. And so it's really important, depending on the kind of work that you do, that you have enough light to see what you're doing, right? Also, a no smoking work environment is really important because, by now we know that smoking causes lung cancer, and even secondhand smoking can cause cancers. And so, it's not illegal, but it's best if you work in a smoke-free environment. Fire escape routes and procedures. So you guys have seen it in school that there are fire escape maps in every classroom. These kinds of things should be in place in every business, in every place where people work. There should be a route that people know is the way out of the building. And then ergonomically arranged office equipment. And what that means is that your desk, the place that you work, should help to support your body and the work that you're doing and not make things harder for you. And so, you guys know we've been on online learning now for 8 months. And, teachers are sitting in chairs. We've got our computers on. We've got our, our laptops and all these things in front of us. And so it's important that when you're working on a computer that you're sitting up straight, that you, have a good desk, that you have a good chair, all of these kinds of things. And so your employer can provide these things, desks, computer screens, mouse pads, but also like carpal tunnel pads or keyboard pads. And your employer should also provide training. So if you're going to drive a forklift, then your employer should teach you how to drive a forklift. If there's a chemical that you need to use, then your employer should train you on using that chemical or that equipment. And so those are all things that your employers should be doing to keep you healthy and safe. And so there are different agencies, different people that are responsible for different things in the workplace. So we're going to start with regulatory agencies. These are places like OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. You have the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency. And all of those organizations, all those agencies they set laws and requirements. They say you can't work more than 12 hours, or you can't, use this chemical. You can't stand on something that's not a ladder. They're the ones that are setting all the rules. And so they have to monitor work conditions. And you may see that there's sometimes inspectors that come to work sites. Those are your OSHA inspectors. Those are your EPA inspectors that are coming to see, are you following the laws, the workplace laws and requirements that we have established? And they're also responsible for creating new laws, for saying, you know what, we're seeing a lot of this happen and we want to prevent it. And so to prevent it, we're going to do this thing. Your employer, the person who hires you, they have to communicate and enforce the laws. They have to say, look, Vanessa, you can't stand on that chair to hammer that. You have to stand on a ladder. And so to do that, they have to train their employees. They have to provide guidelines. They should be setting an example. If my boss tells me that I can't stand on a chair to do something, then I shouldn't find my boss standing on a chair, right? Your employer, the person that hires you, should be setting those examples and making sure that the employees understand what the expectations are. They also should be purchasing safety equipment. So, if you go to a work site, a job, and they say, okay, well, you need safety goggles and steel-toed boots and a hard hat to work here, they should be providing those things. And so sometimes they'll provide you reimbursements. They'll say, okay, go buy the boots and then bring the receipt and we'll give you the money. That still counts as them providing the equipment because they paid you back for that. So those are all things that your employer does, okay? The employee, this is you, the person getting the job, you have to follow the rules, right? You have to be smart about what you're doing. You can't say, well, the boss isn't here and I really need to hammer this thing and the ladder's busy, so, well, I'm just going to stand in the chair. If you know you're not supposed to do something and you've been told don't do it, then common sense says don't do the thing, right? And then always ask for clarification. If you're like, well, I don't know if I should do this, ask. Find somebody, find your boss, find a supervisor and say, hey, I'm not sure about this thing. Can you provide clarification? And so some of the things that can impair us at work is substance abuse in the workplace. And so substances such as alcohol, drugs, all of those things can negatively impact not only your organization as a whole, but for you specifically, it can decrease your productivity. It's a big safety hazard. We talk about, safety issues and how difficult it is to maintain safety when you're in your faculties. But if you're, drunk or high or distracted or things like that, then you're creating really dangerous situations, not just for yourself, but for the people around you. And so you want to have an organization that you work with. You want to have a business that's going to help you if you're in this situation. Some organizations, some employers are going to require drug tests. And I know that when I worked at McCoy's in college, I got drug tested every six months. I'm not a person who uses drugs or abuses drugs, and I would get selected and I was like, oh, cool. Like I'm going to have a half a day off of work to go, take this drug test. But if I had not passed my drug test, then I would not have a job, right? And so your employer can make your employment conditional. They can say, only if you pass your drug test will you be able to keep this job. So you always want to make sure that you are doing what it is that you need to do to maintain your job, right? Some employers also offer rehab programs. And, we talk about substance abuse, but what we don't talk about is how it really is an illness. And so we have to treat it as something that we can help people with and not stigmatize that it's like a bad thing. It's not great if you have a substance abuse problem, but you want to help people and not be judgmental about it. And so with that, some employers have very specific anti-substance abuse policies. And, if something is in writing, if it's in the handbook, if it's a policy, then it's a requirement and you have to follow those guidelines. You have to follow those recommendations from your employer, because they can fire you for not following those policies. But because you have rights, because as an employee, you have certain rights, your employer cannot ask you, hey, Vanessa, are you doing drugs? But they can have you take a drug test, right? They cannot say, I'm only going to make Vanessa take a drug test and I'm not going to make anybody else take a drug test. If one employee has to take it, or you're going to do it randomly, then everybody has to have the possibility of taking a drug test. You can't just say just this one person is going to take a drug test. So, those are things that you need to take into consideration. You also have the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so your employer is responsible for complying with this American with Disabilities Act. So an employer can ask you what you can do. They can say, hey, can you type? He says, yeah, I can type, 90 words a minute or whatever. They can't say, I noticed that you wear glasses. Is it because you can't see? Right? They have to ask about the things you can do, not the things you can't do. They also have to make reasonable accommodations. So my mom, I'll give you this example. My mom has Parkinson's. She works in an office. All of the office chairs have wheels, and they don't have armrests on the desk chairs. Well, because of her Parkinson's, sometimes she struggles to get up. And so she requested a chair with no wheels so that, when she pushed up on the chair, it wouldn't roll out from under her. And she requested a chair with armrests. And her employer said, yeah, that is a reasonable request. We can get you a different chair. Now, if she had said, okay, I have Parkinson's and I want to be able to work from home all the time, well, that's maybe not a reasonable request, because why can't you work at work, right? And so you can make some requests, but your employer is the one that will decide is it reasonable? Is it something that we can do? Your employer also has to make sure that buildings and workspaces meet ADA guidelines. So you'll notice that doors have to be a certain size. There have to be ramps to get into a building. All of these are things that are required for ADA compliance. And then you have to provide equal compensation and salary. You can't say, well, Vanessa's disabled and she can't type as fast as everybody else, so we're going to pay her less. You cannot make that distinction to pay somebody differently because of their disability. But it does not require employers to hire a disabled applicant over a non-disabled applicant. And it does not allow for the employee to ask for accommodations that are going to be a financial hardship. It kind of goes back to that example with the chair. Like, you can ask for a chair that doesn't roll and with armrests, but you can't ask for like a special leather, Shaquille O'Neal edition, massaging chair. There are limits to what you can request. We also have the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And what they do is they ensure that employees are treating their employers are treating their employees in a fair and equitable way. In other words, everybody's getting the same shot for hiring, for firing, for promotions, for minimum wage standards, and for sexual harassment. You're not going to say, well, Ruby was late, so we're going to fire her, but Dominic was late, and we're not going to fire him. That would not be fair and equitable. You need to make sure. And so this commission is the one that says, they're the ones that hear complaints like that. Like, well, I got fired because I was late twice, but somebody was late 4 times and hasn't gotten fired. They're the ones that handle those kinds of cases. And so they ensure the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Pay Act, the Age Discrimination Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the ADA prohibits employers from discriminating against people with disabilities, and we mentioned this briefly. And it is enforced by the EEOC and the U.S. Department of Education. So this is one that's actually being talked about a lot right now, is the Family and Medical Leave Act. And so what this does is it gives you okay, sorry guys. So what this does is it legally gives you the opportunity to take 12 weeks of unpaid time off. And so you can take these 12 weeks for a number of different reasons. It's for employees that are dealing with health problems of themselves or their family member. And so what it does is your employer does not have to pay you, right? That's why it says unpaid time off. But they cannot fire you during those 12 weeks. And so a lot of people use this for when they have babies. We probably incorrectly call it maternity leave, but it is part of FMLA. If you get sick, if a family member gets sick, as an employee, you have the right to request and use your FMLA. Now, the federal government did extend FMLA to include 10 additional days due to COVID. And so we have until December, because the law that was, or the law that was passed was only until December of 2020. But if I get sick as a teacher, I can use 10 days of my COVID sick leave before I start my FMLA sick leave. And so that's in place so that, people that get sick and also have a sick family member can take care of themselves and take time to take care of their family member. And so this FMLA is important because it's what allows you to leave to take care of a family member and still also come back and have a job. So some employers do have exercise and nutrition programs. Our district is one of those employers. We have an exercise facility for the employees. We have cafeterias that we can eat at. We have exercise activities every month for the employees. You may have seen some of your teachers. We play softball, we play volleyball, we play kickball. We have stuff all the time that we're doing for exercise and wellness. And so some employees will have things like that. My uncle works at an engineering firm, and they have a gym on site, a gym and a cafeteria. And so he says that they serve really good food, but that it's also very healthy, because they understand that if their employees eat well and are healthy, and they're exercising, that they're more likely to be working and to not have to be out because they're sick. So some employers will have programs like this to benefit their employees. And so that deals with, the responsibilities of your employer, right? The person that hires you, those are their responsibilities. What are your responsibilities, or how do you as an employer, how does your employer keep you safe? So one thing that you need to think about wherever you're working is to avoid strong smells and harmful materials. I think about when I go get my nails done, that these ladies are working with those powders and those chemicals all day long. And I don't like the smell of all that stuff. And I'm only there for like an hour getting my nails done. And so, if you are working in a place that has strong smells, you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. Also avoiding repetitive stress. Is this a place where all I'm doing is flipping tortillas all day, and then when I get home, my wrists hurt or my shoulder hurts because I'm just doing the same motion over and over again? You also need to make sure you drink plenty of water, and I'm really guilty of this. I drink coffee and I drink soda. I almost never drink water. And so my body doesn't need coffee and soda. My body needs water. And so you want to make sure that you're maintaining your body and keeping yourself healthy. And part of that is drinking water. So how do we train employees? How do we make sure that the employees are being safe? Well, they have written manuals. There's training seminars. There's emails. There's safety contracts. There's performance reviews where you get evaluated as an employee, and they tell you, hey, you know what? You need to work on this, or you need to work on that. Or simulations and practice sessions, where they put you in a scenario, and then they figure out, what can they do? How can they improve? What can they change? So those are all ways in which employees can improve their safety. So as an employee, you need to make sure you follow the guides and regulations, that if you see something that's wrong, that you report that, that you're following the procedures that are established, and also that you wear protective gear. So, if you're in a job that requires a hard hat, it's not optional. That protection is required. So you want to make sure that you do that at every opportunity. Then you have OSHA, and I mentioned this briefly, the Occupational Safety and Health Act. And this was established, this was enacted in 1970. And this is a law that says that workplaces have to be safe. It has to be free of dangers. And it covers everything: equipment, radiation, chemical pollutants, airborne pollutants. It really is comprehensive in a way that makes sure that the employee is protected as much as possible. And so it requires frequent inspections. And they check everything. How loud is it in this place? Is the air clean? Is the equipment safe and up to date? Is everybody using the right tools and the right safety gear? And so it's really important that companies, that employers follow these guidelines, because the business can be shut down if they're not following these requirements. And so they have a 5-item priority list. They first go to places that are in imminent danger. Then they check on places that have had serious accidents in the last 40 days. Then they go to places that have any current employee complaints. Then they look at industries that have a higher injury ratio. And then just randomly, they can go someplace and do an inspection. So that's their 5 priorities. And so when they're checking, they're looking for, do workers have fresh air? They're testing new buildings for safety hazards. They're looking for smoke. Are the air ducts clean and dry? Are the employees allowed to get exams and have checkups? And so OSHA is going to do a lot to try to keep the employees safe and healthy. So what are the things that can cause work-related accidents? Human error. Just we're humans. We get distracted. We make mistakes. We're unfocused. Carelessness. I just don't care, so I'm not going to worry about it. Intoxication, which again goes back to substance abuse. Daydreaming. And I would say daydreaming goes under carelessness, right? If I'm focused on a job, that's what I should be doing. Human deficiency. Maybe I don't know how to do this thing, and my boss has me doing a job that I am clearly not capable of doing. That would be human deficiency. Poor job skills and training, right? Maybe I haven't been told how I'm supposed to do this job. And so that's why I don't know how to do it. And so, all of those things can come into play when errors happen. All of those are things that that you need to look out for in a workplace to make sure that you don't do those things so that you can stay safe. So in order to prevent accidents, your employer should be educating you, they should be providing training, and they should respond, right? So if you see a problem like, hey, this vent is always leaking and it makes a puddle and somebody's going to slip. Well, don't keep that information to yourself. Tell your boss, tell your supervisor so that then they can fix it. And then you don't have issues where you could potentially have an accident. And so for an employee, look at the area around you, look at where you're working, make sure that you're encouraging your coworkers to be safe, and be preventive, right? Don't wait for something to happen. As far as equipment goes, and you guys may be working with all kinds of different equipment, you want to make frequent checks to make sure that the equipment is safe. You want to remove obsolete equipment. If it doesn't work, you don't need it, and then you just need to get rid of it. You want to make sure that you're alert or attentive and that you're not playing around, right? Next to a saw is not the place to be horseplaying. There are certain places where, we can sit in the break room and we can joke, but maybe we shouldn't be horseplaying around dangerous equipment. And so you should always have a plan in place. Your employer your employer should always have a plan. And there are plans probably for hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, fires, terrorism. There's all kinds of things that are going on that you need to be prepared for. And so the environment too, you also need to keep an eye out for sharp objects, slippery walkways, hazardous waste, loose steps. I know my first year teaching, the classroom that I taught in was in a portable, and it was a really old portable. And I opened the door and the door came off the hinges. And I fell down because the door fell on me. And I ended up cutting my ankle. And it was like a totally unexpected thing. But it was a hazard, right? It was an environmental hazard that I was not, prepared for. Being aware of them doesn't mean that accidents aren't going to happen. But if we can keep our eyes open for those kinds of things, then maybe we can prevent something from happening. We can't ever eliminate accidents 100%. That's what the word accident means, right? It's something unexpected. But we can avoid it as much as possible. Sanitation is also important. And especially right now, hand washing is super important, wearing your mask. If somebody's working with food, are they washing their hands? Are they wearing, hairnets? If you're working with food, you have to be even more diligent, but especially right now, in the situation that we're in with COVID and quarantines and all these kinds of things, you want to make sure that your sanitation practices are good. And so workman's compensation is a program that provides insurance if you get injured at work. And it's very specific. So let's say that I'm at work and I'm drinking coffee and I burn my mouth drinking coffee. And I decide that I need to go to the doctor. Well, drinking coffee is not part of my job, right? It's not a requirement of my job. But if I'm on duty in the morning in the cafeteria and I slip and fall and I get hurt, then I am covered because being on duty is part of my job. And so what it does, it provides replacement income and it covers medical expenses if you get injured or sick at work. And so it's used by thousands of employers and employees every year. But it is very specific to injuries that happen while you are on the job. And so our last section is workplace policies. Whenever you work somewhere, you need to make sure that you understand the policies, that there's sufficient detail, that they're communicated to you regularly, and that everybody follows them, right? Nobody is exempt from following the rules. And so there are different violations and ethical issues that will come into play: sexual harassment, discrimination, and discrimination really can be based on almost anything. Age discrimination, religion, pregnancy, disability. There are lots of things that you can discriminate against people for. You need to avoid all of those. And so if somebody does do something inappropriate, something unethical, you need to make sure that you know who you would report that to. Do I tell my boss? Do I tell human resources? What if my boss is the one that's doing something unethical? And so you always want to be in a position where you're doing the right thing. And so, you always want to report any kind of ethical or legal violations, so that you're not then part of the problem. So sexual harassment, it can happen anywhere at any time, and it can also happen to anyone. And it involves referring to a person's physical appearance. It can also involve inappropriate touching, requesting inappropriate actions, or sending pictures or literature of a sexual nature. So even, from a student to a student, if you're sending inappropriate pictures, a student can make a complaint against another student for sexual harassment. And those are things, especially for some of you that are a little bit older in your grade level. In the state of Texas, once you're 17, you're considered an adult. And you can get yourself in some major trouble if you're sending inappropriate pictures. So just kind of, keep those things in mind. Just take care of yourselves, because those can impact admission into college. They can impact even some employment opportunities. And so sexual harassment policies should be definitive and strong. Clear definitions, confidentiality for people that report, training for people that are employed there, and really a zero tolerance attitude, where we're not going to accept this from anybody, at any time. And so the Fair Labor Standard Act is actually a really, really old act, and it was written in 1938. And what it said was that it was going to create a minimum wage, that everybody would make at least a minimum wage, which in 2020, I believe the minimum wage is, I'm going to look it up. The minimum wage in Texas right now is $7.25 an hour. And so it set a minimum wage law. It also said that anyone who worked over 40 hours a week would be getting overtime, which is 1.5 times your pay rate. So you would take 7.25 times 1.5, and that would be your hourly rate at time and a half. It also provided for child labor laws. So it used to be that children as young as 6 were getting jobs. And having to work, 12 hours in a mine, or, 10 hours at a factory, and not going to school and things like that. And so this act made it illegal for children to work before the age of 16. Your employee should also have a confidentiality policy, and they should be clear what is confidential at your business, what is a legal document, what is okay to share, and what is not okay to share. Some businesses have proprietary information, technology, materials, and things like that that only they can use. And so you want to make sure that you're not like, oh, yeah, I'm going to take this piece of wire home and use it for something else, because it might be that that's like a special patented wire or something. And so breach of confidentiality could result in you being terminated. You could get criminal charges. There could be lawsuits. It could be that, hey, you're never going to get a job anywhere else because, we're not going to hire you because you're doing these things to breach confidentiality. And so I do want to remind you that for this week, you guys have you guys have three tests. It is, I'm sorry, not 3, 6. You have 6 assessments. And so you don't have any other activity for this week other than the 6 assessments. Please make sure that you get those done. Everybody will have 2 opportunities to do those, and you all are good to go, folks. Bye, guys.